United Kingdom kid migrants to Rwanda, calling it a shocking waste of taxpayers' money totaling £700 million, approximately $904 million. Upon assuming office earlier this month, Keir Starmer, the successor to the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, swiftly put an end to the controversial plan. Sunak's initiative to halt the influx of asylum seekers crossing the English Channel from France, known as stopping the boats, faced legal challenges and drew criticisms from various human rights groups. Elucidating on the expenditure, Cooper highlighted that the cost of the unsuccessful plan included 900, or that is 290 million pounds in payments to the East African nation, as well as expenses for chartering flights that never departed, detaining and then releasing hundreds of individuals, and funding over 1,000 civil servants to carry out the initiative. Official data reveals that close to 1,500 migrants arrived in the United Kingdom via small boats across the English Channel in just 1 week, and Sunak's strategy aimed at tackling the increasing number of migrants globally, peaking at 46,000 in 2022, will make the perilous journey across the English Channel. Britain's previous government had planned to spend £10 billion on a now scrapped plan to deport asylum seekers, and earlier this month the court had blocked the project out of concern for the safety of migrants being deported to the African country. We shall be analyzing in the course of today's edition the statement made by the UK's Home Secretary lambasting the Rwanda migrant plan. In the course of this edition with our numerous guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point. Stay with us. Hello, Africa and the world. Thank you for joining us on a fresh dose of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Today we focus on the UK-Rwanda migrant deal that was scrapped off by the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, earlier this month. And we recall that in a recent statement, the new UK Home Secretary has come out to say that it was a waste of the taxpayers' money of the United Kingdom. Of course, this comes after we saw earlier this month, the first week of July, when the representative of the Rwandan government, a spokesperson, revealed that the Rwandan government was not going to refund any money because the signed deal did not stipulate any of that. We shall be analyzing these latest developments in the course of this program with our guests with us. We shall be taking you first in Cameroon here with His Excellency, or better still, His Royal Highness Chief MUSI Waamuwure, who is joining us all the way here from Cameroon, and you are Pan-Africanist. Greetings to you, sir.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for having me on the show. It's always my pleasure being on the show.
It's always a pleasure having you to share your views with the African continent. We're equally been joined out of Africa by Dr. Stanley FONGOD, who is a Pan-Africanist, and he doubles as an economist. Greetings to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon to you, Sharon. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you on board. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we shall welcome this report done for us by Bukamarabi in a bid to comprehend today's topic of discussion around these latest developments on the UK-Rwanda migrant deal.
Yvette Cooper, British Home Secretary, on Monday criticized the UK-Rwanda migrant deal aiming to assist asylum seekers. Cooper noted in Parliament that the Conservative government, led by former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, had paid £700 million to Rwanda to accept migrants from the United Kingdom. According to Cooper, only 4 volunteering migrants had been sent to the East African country under what she terms controversial scheme that the Labour government is planning to abolish. The newly elected Labour government declared that the migration plan is dead and buried, and that a new approach will be taken to address migration concerns. Home Secretary Cooper recalled in Parliament that the previous government had plans to spend over £10 billion on its Rwanda deportation scheme. She described the act as the most shocking waste of taxpayer money she has ever witnessed. However, Shadow Home Secretary James cleverly accused Cooper of using made-up numbers. Being a previous Home Secretary before the elections, cleverly castigated the new Labour government for discarding the Rwanda policy on ideological grounds only. The Labour leader and Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, stressed that the lack of workplace skills has left the UK continuously dependent on immigration. He also revealed his blueprint to revamp training in England in a bid to reduce the need for firms to hire foreign workers. Starmer outlined the plans for the proposed establishment of a new government body known as Skills England to work closely with migration advisors in order to enhance training programs for industries that currently rely on immigration workers. Rwanda and the previous UK consecutive government sealed a deal in April 2022 to facilitate the transfer of some migrants who arrive in the UK across the English Channel to Rwanda, where their asylum claims would be processed.
Thank you, Buke Marambi, for that detailed report. Ladies and gentlemen, a bit now to commence the conversation. I'll kickstart with you, Your Majesty MUSI. You listened to that report. What is your analysis as pertaining these latest developments on the UK-Rwanda migrant deal, which we saw debuted a long time ago? Your Majesty, please could you unmute your mic?
Yeah, I'm saying my understanding about this migrant deal first, it's in relation to what the former Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, had wanted to implement in his regime under the consecutive law. First, I understand as a consecutive, and you know, it's a born Indian-born British citizen. And if you look at his strategy, he called for this election because he, as a consecutive, they found that lots of migrants were coming into the UK. And as a strategy for them to repulse this, they decided to liaise with a country like Rwanda that's fast growing from moving out of the third world to a second or first world kingdom. And they have seen that already as one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. And I think most of the Western powers are turning towards Rwanda. I think because of the perfect legislative system and role of government that Paul Kagame has put in that country, most European countries are turning towards relying or having partnerships with Rwanda. And UK is not just an exception to this. Reason why I think Sunak, Rishi, wanted to use this as a way of retracting those migrants, you know, discouraging migrants from coming into the UK by advocating that they will be deported to a third world country like Rwanda. There is a little bit something deeper to that, which in the course of the program we will still try to analyze. But I think that was a smart move by Rishi Sunak, the PM, the former PM of the UK. That was a smart move, but unfortunately, it backfired. It backfired because when his party was toppled some few weeks ago, and we had Keir Starmer come in, it actually came to where we are on this panel to discuss about how this has been lambasted. And I would say, to my understanding, this is this was certainly a very failed strategy that was taken by the former government of the UK under PM Sunak. And I don't even know what the Rwandan government considered before accepting such a deal. I don't know if it was because of the economic influx, the financial influx that his country was going to get, or it was because of egoistic reasons from his central government. This and many others, I think we will share. I have seen my colleague FONGOD is there. Dr. FONGOD is on the panel, and it's someone we have always been and talked about economic activities. We have talked about Pan-Africanism. And I think we will unfold on lots of this and see how most of these African leaders, how they tend to easily give in into Western manipulation. So, yeah, I think this is just a failed move. But I also appreciate the fact that the Labour Party of the UK Labour Party under Keir Starmer has come up very strong to repulse this and refuse that migrants have a right to countries where they want to seek immigration to. So I think we will be looking at this as we unfold on the program.
Absolutely, Your Highness. Now, in a bit to proceed now with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to your co-panelists, and of course he cited that this might have economic implications on the United Kingdom. But when you look at this deal from the perspective as a Pan-Africanist, as an economist, what's your overview of the latest developments as far as this deal is concerned?
I think we really need to start looking at what is it that the UK was desiring to accomplish. And unfortunately, if that's not the case, we will have great difficulties in even understanding what is going on so far as the UK is concerned. I'm thinking that there are what I call a little bit more advantages to the reason why the UK actually cancelled that from an economic perspective. But when you're looking at how much money the UK spent annually just in being able to restrict people from coming into the UK, you're looking over £400 million. If that was going to be the case, we are not talking about the amount of money that the UK spent in just trying to be able to take care of those who are already in the UK illegally. We are talking about those illegally means maybe those who have come into the UK and have outstayed their visas and they're just, living in the UK. They take care of, the UK is more of a little bit of a socialist society, and it's a welfare state. Most likely it's just a welfare state. So they take care of housing, they will be taking care of healthcare. There's a lot of perks that they give out to those who live in the UK. Whether you're illegal or not illegal, that money is being spent on those who are in the UK. The overall expenditure might be way over 10 million US dollar, $10 million US. So the whole entire idea about scrapping the program, for me, it's a little bit more of a semantics in relationship to what is happening geopolitically. Most Western countries never loved that idea. A lot of humanitarian groups thought that Rwanda was not a very good example of a place where they should be able to be shipping migrants to. And I understand that from a more, if you look at it from a political, vantage point, to those who try to be able to make themselves look good and always have a stellar record on human record, even though on human, on the issues of human abuses, even though they themselves do not even adhere to some of the principles that they so much espouse. The reality is that in context of the geopolitical nature of what we are facing today, I am thinking that the UK made a huge blunder, and because they have to deal with this particular issue, or otherwise they will be drowning African migrants that are coming into the UK through the streets of Gibraltar. They will be drowning them daily because this wave will not stop. What's happening on the African continent in most part is what was created by the British Empire. They created this madness that is happening on the African continent. And so when young Africans are migrating into Europe, moving straight into the UK, it's because that is home to them psychologically, mentally. They are going back home. No young African who is of an Anglo-Saxon origin in terms of our language will be trying to find their way into France. They always will go into the UK. And because everything that they have been taught, everything about us that has infused itself into our culture, how be it superficially, has been from the United Kingdom. So we have to be able to deal with this madness. And unfortunately, I'm thinking that there has to be a better way in handling this issue rather than strapping the program. Maybe renegotiate the deal, maybe try to find out how Rwanda should be able to deal with some of the issues that is being raised concerning human rights abuses, maybe being able to, bring Rwanda back to the table and say, look, listen, this is what we're looking at. What guarantees do we get? What are the gains that you've made so far based upon how short these policies have been in place? And then maybe if that was going to be the case, then that becomes meaningful. Unfortunately, I think that obviously the present administration ran on the premise that they were going to scrap the program, and they're just fulfilling what it is that the UK population wants now.
Thank you, Mansley. Dr. FONGOD, now to proceed, you said this could equally have, or they should renegotiate the deal, which is something very, very important. But then back to you, Your Highness MUSI, you listen to your co-panelists. Now listening gets into the point where we get the statements made by the new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. She said it was a wastage of the taxpayers' money. Now, according to your co-panelists, it has implications on the economy of the United Kingdom. But then how true is this assertion when we look at a nation like Rwanda that is doing well in terms of its economy, but it's still a tiny nation on the African continent? What attracted the United Kingdom to Rwanda?
First, I think we should take note here that Rwanda is just coming out of a crisis situation that has been over the years. And Rwanda had their 2020 plan action, their Vision 2020, and they are just a few years into a vision. And a country that is with all the trauma that they've had, their citizens are barely coming back into their realities to enjoy their country as a nation that is stable. And first, in such a situation, the citizens of that country need to enjoy their civic rights as Rwandans and benefit from them in all aspects. But from this deal, I'm seeing, because if you look at the money that the British government has already put into Rwanda on this bill, it's almost 220 million pounds so far. And this amount of money that has been put into this, I am having a feeling that the UK government are only looking at the fact that the Rwandans have the space, they have developed systems, they have proper government infrastructures, they have the buildings, they have the land that can accommodate that kind of that influx of immigrants, and also they are forgetting to understand that Rwandans as citizens have a right to their nation. They have a right to determine how people want to come into their country. And what really baffles me is the fact that before the government of Rwanda even went ahead to accept immigrants into their country, it would have been an issue of selective immigration. What do I mean by this? You don't just bundle immigrants from different parts of the world and push them into a continent and push them into a country without knowing exactly why these people seek immigration into that country. Because like Dr. FONGOD said, every immigrant has a right to whichever country he or she is seeking refuge to. Some are coming for economic reasons, some are coming to better their lifestyles, some are coming to better their family, some are coming for educational purposes, some are coming because of crisis situations in their own countries, some are coming because of rebellion. I mean, look at what is happening in Gaza. Most Palestinians will be moving back into the UK, and you don't know the kind of criminals that are moving into the UK.
Absolutely.
And why is the UK only at this particular moment sending these immigrants to Africa? Why are they sending this particular bunch of immigrants into Rwanda, a country that has long suffered from wars? These immigrants that are coming into the UK, some of them are coming from the Gaza Strip, and you don't know who these people are. So I think this is a manipulation, in my understanding, that the West is trying to push people with a negative or improper background into Africa, using their finances as a bargaining power. And as a Pan-Africanist, I think this is a very wrong strategy for us governments to accept people into our country without knowing exactly why these people are coming. If these people had been tried in the UK and their case gone through the UK courts, and they are only sending this people into Rwanda with a case file that this person has a valid reason to stay in the UK, but because we cannot accommodate, law system does not accommodate, but they don't have this basic documentation to show for these people who are coming into Rwanda. So why would African leaders want to accept such a thing? Africa, they have always debunked, they have always said, oh, we Africans, we are fighting to come into Europe. Now they are trying to send back immigrants into Africa. I don't think this is the proper thing to do. And I think one thing we have to really take note here is that we need to be very careful.
Unfortunately, we're losing you, Your Excellency, Your Highness MUSI. But then to proceed back with you, Dr. FONGOD, to listen to your co-panelists, and he said it was something that needed to be consulted by the African continent as a whole. We recall that in January, when President Paul Kagame of Rwanda said he was willing to refund back the money that was being disbursed as far as this deal was concerned, but then he mentioned that this was a case in case it failed, but we saw later on early this July when the spokesperson for the Rwandan government said the government of Rwanda was not going to send back any money. Now, could we say that all the events that led to this statement made by the new Home Secretary are actually interrelated?
Well, the idea that Rwanda will be sending any money back to the UK is laughable. Or the idea that Rwanda will consciously, even if unconsciously, send any money back to the UK. I'm sure our ancestors as a Pan-African on the continent of Africa will be sitting on the head of Kagame tonight. That would be, it will be sickening. For everything that the UK has done to the continent of Africa, the looting for over 200 years. We're talking about systematically destroying communities, looting artifacts, carrying everything from the Benin Kingdom to every other kingdom you could name on the African continent. To say that we are returning a couple of chicken change in the name of resettlement of immigrants into Africa, that's something that, you know, if anybody is asking for that money out of the UK, they should be smoking something that is absolutely crazy. That's not something that we would do for a fact. So I'm thinking that, you know, I support what the chief was talking about, because the reality is that Africa cannot just become a place where you bring in migrants from every part of the world. There are a lot of bad people in various parts of the world, especially in the Arab world, that are trying to do crazy stuff in these developed nations for the atrocities that they have committed in those countries. We have seen that in the United States. We have seen that happening in Europe, especially in places like France. So we have seen that in the UK with all the knife attacks and everything else. I don't think that we should be bringing these men into the continent, especially when we have our own issues to deal with. We have to be able, I think there have to be some kind of a general consensus on who we are bringing and what type of immigrant should be coming into the continent of Africa. And there should be a plane ready in Rwanda, if this was going to be the case, to export those who are not the kind of individuals that we want on the continent back to their countries of origin. If they are Africans, we'll deal with it. That's our cross. But if they are not, we should be able to take them to wherever they came from, you know, and let them find their way back home into what it will be their natural habitat. This might be as racist as it gets, but for you know, I think for a minute, for the protection of the continent, if you call this racist, so be it.
Thank you, immensely, Dr. FONGOD. Now to get back to you, Chief MUSI, you listened to your co-panelist that was sharing the same point of view as yourself, but then how beneficial would this or could have this deal been to the Rwandan government amidst the different criticisms? Chief MUSI, are you with us? Okay, back to you, Dr. Fongo. Unfortunately, we lost that panelist. We're hoping he's going to get back to us due to the connection issues. But then I was asking, how beneficial could this deal have been to the Rwandan government, despite the numerous criticisms that came from human rights groups and a host of others?
I wonder, I couldn't hear you clearly, but if you were asking how beneficial was this going to be for the Rwandan government, was that the question?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, good. So, look, for the Rwandan government, they was going to be getting all of this money, and then obviously that was money that they had not worked for in many ways, so they had not planned for that. That was money that was just dropped at their laps, but with a lot of responsibilities that would last, generations to come. Because once you bring people into a particular country with no exit strategy so far as they are concerned, that becomes an issue long term. So for me, I'm thinking that if there was going to be any net gain so far as the benefit is concerned for the continent of Africa or for Rwanda in itself, it was going to be very minimal. Maybe scrapping this program actually saves Africa, it saves us, but we always have to look at, what if we had some great migrant workers, people who had the capacity in the tech industry, folks who had a lot of knowledge in the areas of agriculture coming into Rwanda, that would spur up economic growth across the continent, especially when you have that kind of skill set on the continent of Africa like we have in Europe and in the United States. Unfortunately, I'm thinking that we are already in a place on the continent of Africa where our growth has been stunted because of the fact that we do not have skilled workers, on the continent. Most of our skilled workers has been shipped overseas, and I mean, we see this happening in countries like Cameroon, Nigeria. Most of the nurses in Nigeria are out of the country. Most of the doctors in Cameroon, they are out of the country. They are working overseas because obviously the pays are better. We train them, we send them out of the country for, to go out and get a better job. So maybe one of the things that we need to start doing is finding ways in which we improve the working condition for, skilled workers on the continent of Africa, so that we can retain those who have been trained and educated by us, to be able to take care of us on the continent. But unfortunately, they are looking for greener pastures elsewhere. On the case of Rwanda, I think that Rwanda is maybe in a better place right now to systematically grow the way she's been growing, rather than having this influx, of migrant workers, to which to what number precisely we're supposed to be shipped into Rwanda, nobody knows. But for the fact that this project is no longer working, I think Rwanda is in a better place.
Exactly. Just note that the government had declined reimbursing that money. Now, you said earlier on that the UK government does spend a lot of money in trying to prevent people from entering the United Kingdom. It's not as compared to what the government might have lost as far as this deal is concerned. But staying with you, in a bit to comprehend something much more critical, how was this plan going to affect the economy of the United Kingdom's, the United Kingdom's economy, so to say?
Well, obviously, when you have migrant workers coming in, because there's a lot of labor shortages in the UK as we speak, that's why they are constantly getting a lot of migrant workers, especially skilled migrant workers on the continent of Africa. You have countries like Nigeria, countries like Cameroon, that is constantly supplying the UK with nurses, all right? And so you have to be able to know that as a result of this, the labor market, especially in these sectors, will have drastic shortages because they will not be able to have the workers that they are looking for. Even though most of the workers in these sectors have been brought into the UK, directly from their home countries, that means you've applied, they hire you, and then they ship you in, to take care of these jobs. But there's a lot of other workers in other sectors that has actually come into the UK, via illegal migration. So the fact that everybody just gets turned back, it's not that healthy, to the economy. There's a lot of economic contributions that migrants are giving so far as the UK economy is concerned. So the UK economy has a net gain if only they're able to handle their issues of basically welfare. If you reduce whatever is being given out in so far as welfare is concerned, especially when it comes to healthcare, if you reduce that a little bit, you can be able to still keep the economy afloat and then have them basically, not go underwater. And because the taxation also in societies like that, especially in the UK, is extremely high because of, everything else that they have to do in taking care, of those who are citizens or those who are there illegally. The UK is really not a place for you to live if you're trying to be able to escape high taxes.
Now, in a bit to proceed, experts say that people continuously across the Mediterranean in a search for greener pastures on the other side, like Richard Sunak, the former Prime Minister, advocated for. How can the African continent contribute to stopping the boats?
Well, we need to be able to build a more robust economy on the African continent, get the middle class working, and then allow for the growth of the middle class, because this is where everything, really rises and falls on, is on the middle class. If we are not able to build industries, if we are not able to build tech jobs in agriculture, in the mining sector, if we are not able to learn how to convert our raw materials into somewhat semi and finished goods so that we can start exporting goods, finished goods rather than exporting raw materials, then we will not be able to hire as many people as are there on the continent to fill up these jobs and then be able to sell these products out of the continent. Those are the things that we need to do. It is not having more schools. For example, you can have all the skill sets that you need on the African continent. We can change our educational systems to be able to make sure that anyone who is graduating out of our school system has the skill sets to be able to live and survive anywhere else in the world. But as long as the job market is absolutely dismal, as long as many companies are not hiring, as long as small and medium-sized enterprises are really, not flourishing on the continent of Africa, then the job market in itself will not be there. We need to be able to have a job market that has the capacity to hire a lot of Africans. In that way, what seems to be greener out of the continent of Africa will not be greener anymore. And if we are able to do that, then the young Africans will not have they will not see the need to be running out of the continent, for greener pastures in the UK or, in Europe or the United States, or howbeit some of them are actually even going to India and China and Japan. We have to be able to find ways in which we encourage and grow the local economy on the continent of Africa. That's how you retain people from traveling overseas. That's how you give them hope. That's how you get people working, and that's how you grow the middle class.
Exactly. It's all about governments of the African continent taking key initiatives that will boost the economy and definitely the growth of the African continent to make it even more attractive for those in the diaspora back home. Now, in recent years, we've seen the European Union host EU-Africa forums where they were going to try to hinder those that were living or crossing the Mediterranean into Europe. And we saw countries like Italy, the European Union trying to invest in some key sectors in Africa. We saw that during a recent conference that took place in Egypt. But then, in a bit to be cautious about foreign aid that the African continent receives, Could investing in key sectors in Africa actually like boost the Africa's agricultural sector and of course economic developments, thereby hindering people from wanting to travel or migrate illegally?
There's a beauty in being able to invest to those who are on the continent, of Africa, to boost up economic sectors on the continent of Africa so that we can be able to retain workers on the continent. That's noble. The problem is once you start trying to be able to do that, and then you go to the public sector and you employ the public sector to do what the private sector does, that does not work. No government on planet Earth has the capacity to create jobs. No government on planet Earth has the ability to create jobs. The only thing governments know how to do is spend money. Job creation is actually in the hands of the private sector. There are small size or small to medium sized enterprises that creates jobs. There are folks with an entrepreneurial mindset that builds up a small company that grows up to become a small to medium sized enterprises that eventually takes over, a whole entire nation, flushes across international boundaries, and then the world gets to receive them based upon the products that they have so much developed. That's what happens if we are going to be able to build anything that is sustainable on the African continent. It cannot be that we are building it through the public sector. The public sector will eat that money up. The public sector is filled with corruption. The public sector does not know how to do right. Look at every country on the African continent. It is basically shameful to even describe. Put the money in the hands of the private sector, small to medium-sized enterprises. Allow them to be able to explore, expand. Allow them to be able to trade on the continent of Africa with no restrictions. Allow them to be able to hire people that are skilled from across the continent of Africa. As long as you're skilled, come work with us. No visa restrictions, no work visas required. You're an African, you work wherever you are. That's how we build the economy on the African continent. The population of Africa is large enough for us for every small to medium-sized enterprise on the continent of Africa to flourish if that company can only sell her products to the continent. But once they are restricted in individual countries with tariffs and all kinds of taxes they have to pay, custom duties, fees, then they restrict these companies from absolutely becoming what they're supposed to become in terms of their capacity. And what they do not understand is if there's a company that is flourishing in a place like Ghana that wants to sell her products in the place like Nigeria, they will need to have a warehouse, or maybe why not have a location in Nigeria that will carry out some of the services that they need to do rather than doing everything in the place like Ghana. So this will mean that the company in Ghana will be hiring workers in Nigeria, and that is also reducing the amount of young people who will be looking to travel out of the continent just because they're trying to go on to what they consider greener pastures.
Exactly. That would actually prevent those from moving illegally. Now, according to official data, we have over 1,500 migrants that enter the United Kingdom weekly. That is a figure that was released. But then, when the British government ruled out, or the courts actually ruled out that they were preventing or trying to prevent this deal earlier on because it was inhumane. As a Pan-Africanist, when you look at such assertions, do you share the same opinion?
Well, it's whenever anyone from the Western world talks about something being inhumane, it's laughable. And the reason for that is because if there has ever been a time when people have basically espoused such level of cruelty for centuries, the UK literally stands at the front of it all. I think that from slavery to colonialism, you cannot underestimate what the UK has done to the continent of Africa. People do change, but I really have not seen any sustainable, level of change that has happened to the culture and the mindset of those in the UK towards the continent of Africa. We have to be able to fully understand this. So I don't even know what they're talking about. The reality is that on the economic front in the UK, it is totally not sustainable. Period. You cannot bring in as much people into your country without being able to say, you know what, there has to be a cap, there has to be a limit as to how many people should be coming in. Otherwise, you convert the whole entire nation into a third world country, and that is where the UK and Europe, it's heading. That's not my problem. Economically, I don't know. We could care less. We are trying to build the continent. And I think that the only thing that countries like that should do is to heavily invest in the private sector on the African continent to cap that. And then, everything will be all right. If not, the flow of African migrants into Europe, into the UK will not stop, and it should not stop for that matter. If they looted and looted and looted, carried our gold, carried our diamonds, they took our artifacts, developed their societies, we built Europe for them, then it's just obvious that the young Africans should find their ways into Europe, to enjoy what their forefathers, worked so hard for.
Thank you immensely, Dr. FONGOD. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you, Media African. Today, we're focusing on the UK-Rwanda migrant deal, where we saw recently the new Home Secretary of the United Kingdom lambasting the deal as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, saying it was a wastage of taxpayers' money in the UK. So we're evoking this and discussing this with our guests this afternoon. Now, Dr. FONGOD, we saw the Rwandan government that refused to refund this money, which we reiterated earlier on. But then, could we see in the days ahead, or could this decision by the Rwandan government spark some diplomatic tensions? It's not our hope, but then, what is the feasibility, or what are the feasibilities that, of course, this decision could spark a diplomatic tension between the two parties?
The UK should do whatever it takes to be able to spark up that diplomatic tension. I think that the African needs that. I think that Pan-Africans like me, we are hungry for some form of tension with the UK. If the UK wants to see anything remotely close to the money that Rwanda is currently holding, we need every artifact that is in, all the artifacts that are in the custody of the United Kingdom returned to the continent of Africa. We would demand that every gold, every inch, every ounce of it carried out of the continent of Africa that is securely, placed at the Buckingham Palace be returned to the continent of Africa. Every diamond on the crown of the UK monarchy be returned to the continent of Africa. Then it comes back to its origin long before we start thinking about some meager change that they are holding, that they might want to hold Rwanda for. That's chicken change. Look, that's like somebody owing me $1 billion US and is trying to take $1 from me. What the UK has done to the continent of Africa, we are still not even talking about reparations. We are not even talking about the UK paying for the crimes against humanity on the continent of Africa. So that amount of money should not be a point of conversation. Anyone in the UK who raises this stuff up is either stupid, ignorant, or absolutely confused. If that was going to be the case, believe me, the UK will wish there will be protests on the streets of London just because of this madness. And what is it that they try so hard to hide will obviously be exposed. It will be on the marketplace. Her morality will be shopped like nothing has ever been shopped for before. We will expose her for her cruelty. We will expose her for the crimes on humanity on the African continent. The UK knows a whole lot better to be quiet.
Now, you said that is going to actually have some implications, but then such statements from the new Home Secretary were somewhat downgrading as far as Rwanda is concerned. But then, what should we really expect? What should we be expecting in a thought to actually have deals with the rest of the world that are win-win for the development of the African continent? So what should we really be expecting? Would Africa actually, or say Rwanda, actually take firm stance as far as preserving its own integrity is concerned?
There are no integrities to be preserved. Nobody, an armed robber who basically comes into your house and try to lecture you on how not to steal because you took a pen out of an office and you came home with it, that's crazy. Someone who has basically has an experience for over 200-300 years of looting the continent should not say anything, about morality. The UK has no moral structures. Her values are absolutely non-existent so far as the African is concerned, so far as our record on slavery is concerned, so far as our record on human abuses is concerned. The UK should not be saying anything, and so goes to the rest of Europe and the United States for that matter. They should keep quiet. They should not be talking. The reality is this, that if anybody comes to the African continent and their ideas is that you will have to come and lecture us on your moral values, we have ours on the African continent, and all we're saying is this: it has to be fair trade. Unfortunately, a lot of these things that has happened on the African continent has not been to the interest of the African. It has not helped the African. The African has absolutely been in a position where she has been used, misused, and abused by the rest of the world. And that is the problem that we are currently facing. So if you're talking about how would the rest of the world look at Africa and Rwanda for that matter if she doesn't return the money, what we are saying is this, that consider that to be a debt owed by the UK to the continent of Africa, and a lot of money still needs to be paid to the continent of Africa for the crimes that, these Western nations has committed on the African soil. We are still not talking about the issues of reparation, and here we're talking about the issues of returning some chicken change, to the UK. That's beyond my imagination. If Rwanda will ever return anything, then I'm sure that Paul Kagame will be smoking something that is not earthly, something that is quite extraterrestrial in nature. There is no way any Pan-African will stand for that madness.
Exactly, and let's recall that the Rwandan government had said whatever is happening was a UK problem and not a Rwanda problem. Now, you've said earlier on that this does not affect the integrity of either Rwanda or the African continent, but then amidst conflict, amidst the numerous conflicts that are plaguing the African continent, how safe can we say is Africa as far as hospitality is concerned? And now we just got indications that we have Chief MUSI back with us. You're welcome back, sir. Now, could you proceed on your reaction as far as Africa is concerned, determining how safe it is in terms of hospitality? You may proceed, Chief MUSI.
I didn't get that, Sharon. Please, can you come back again, please?
Okay. Just in line with what your co-panelist was stating earlier on, he said that the deal does not affect in any way the integrity of Rwanda, not the African continent. So we've seen this high influx of migrants from Africa to the rest of the world in recent times. But then, how does these numerous conflicts which we're seeing across the African continent affecting different African countries, does that actually impact how safe Africa is in terms of hospitality? Could you hear me? Chief MUSI, is the reception proper actually at your end?
It's unfortunately the lines are breaking. But if I got you well, I don't know if you're asking that the recurrent nature of immigration across the African continent, what do I think in that relation? I don't know if that's what you're saying, but the line has really been, the internet connections have really been bad. But what I want to think is that, let me quickly just say this before I go off. Normally, what's going on right now in Rwanda, it's just something that will happen to many other African countries that are developing. I remember this almost happened in Egypt. This almost happened in Egypt, and that led to the chaos that we.
Unfortunately, we lost him again. Hopefully, you're going to get back to us, Your Highness. But proceeding with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to that question that was channeled to your co-panelist, Chief MUSI, regarding how hospitable the African continent is as far as when we look at the other side of this migrant deal.
We're quite hospitable on the African continent. I don't think that there is anything that the African has done in her recent past that has made anyone around the world question just how hospitable we are. The idea is that we have been used tremendously, to our disadvantage on the continent of Africa, and we have absolutely not benefited anything from it. That is the expense that the African is no longer willing to incur. If we are going to talk about being able to be treated fairly on the world stage, then let us be treated fairly on the world stage as Africans, and not because we are subhuman, not because we are at that continent, not because we are uncivilized, not because people do not know who we are. We are treated as, people who live in a safari. We are not monkeys. We are not animals. We are humans. And the notion that the world has to come to Africa always as a messiah, whenever somebody shows up on the African continent, is because they're coming to the continent as gods, to help us, to help you subhumans definitely gain some kind of salvation into civilization, gain some kind of salvation into healthcare, or giving us some form of education that they deem that is necessary for us in terms of our own evolution and growth. I think that is quite demeaning, and that's crazy to say the least. So the African needs to be treated equally. The African needs to be treated as equal partners on the world stage. And if anyone showed up on the African continent and was looking for some kind of partnership, let that partnership be a mutual partnership that is a win-win, situation for the African and that particular individual. That's all I'm saying. But the notion that anyone should come to the African continent and treat us as if to say we're a byproduct of human civilization, that is crazy. That is absolutely something that no African, nor a Pan-African like myself will stand for.
Absolutely. Now, looking at the ongoing conflicts on the African continent, we said could be hindering this issue of stability in Africa. But then when we look at these numerous conflicts, we've cited that it's of urgent need. There's this clarion call for the African continent to stand united and collaborate amongst themselves for them to be able to address this issue of security. But then, as a Pan-Africanist, like you mentioned, how the leaders, or how can African leaders actually address this issue of conflicts on the African continent?
There are few leaders on the African continent that has Africa at heart, and we are talking about, while we are at it, let's look at Rwanda. I think that Rwanda, the President Kagame, has done a lot to the African and has done a lot to show the light of what responsible leadership looks like on the continent of Africa. The rest are literally puppets from the Western world. Once you have a puppet in place, a puppet always has a puppet master. The puppet master pulls the strings, things, and the puppet reacts to whatever the puppet master wants. The puppet has no mind of their own. The puppet is only being controlled, manipulated, and, literally told what to do by the puppet master. So most of our African presidents are puppet masters of the West, from France to the United States. And that's the reality. If you're asking me, how do we solve the conflicts and the issues we have on the African continent, we can only solve that when young Africans decide that they're going to elect to power those who who share the same visions like themselves. If you're trying to be able to build up a life in the next 3 decades, you cannot be putting somebody who has a decade, to live. You have to be able to put somebody who is going to suffer the same, who is going to suffer under the same policies that they enact like yourself. I would rather have somebody who is looking at a 30-year plan, a 3-decade plan, rather than somebody who has a 5-day strategy. Reasons being, we can only be able to build the continent, get away from wars, if we look at this from a long-term strategy. And this is what I would say to everyone on the continent of Africa who has a gun. The day you love your children more than you hate your enemies, these terror attacks, these civil wars, and this bigotry and fighting on the African continent will end. We cannot be fighting on the African continent based upon colonial ideals and colonial identifications. We cannot be fighting on the African continent because someone speaks English and another person speaks French. That is crazy at all levels. We have to be able to find ways in which we coexist, not as Eurocentric individuals on the continent of Africa, but as Africans. You are an African first, long before you became Anglo-Saxon. You are an African first, long before you became a Francophone. You will always be an African. You bleed African. You are an African born on the continent of Africa. And if you think that somewhat, you are an English individual, you are Anglophone, and you are Francophone for that matter, why don't you leave Cameroon, leave Senegal, leave the DRC, and then go out to Europe and see the way you're treated as an animal on the streets of London, on the streets of Paris, or on the streets of any of those Scandinavian nations? Because obviously speaking, the rate of racism that is being experienced by Africans outside of Africa is crazy. That's to tell you that this identification that you're fighting for is meaningless. It has gotten us to a place of delusion, and we are losing our minds on things that is absolutely meaningless. We have to be able to realize we are Africans. If we can't stand and fight as Africans, there's nothing else left on the table. We should better just give it up and call ourselves, subhumans or something. But as long as we are Africans, as long as they are Pan-Africans who espouse these ideas, we should be able to solve our issues on the continent by ourselves. The salvation of the African is an African. It's not going to be a European or an American. It's not going to be a Caucasian or someone from Asia. It's an African. Africans are responsible for their own issues. In the voice of Marcus Garvey, Africans are for Africans at home and abroad.
Absolutely, and I do want to reiterate that the divided kingdom cannot stand. If Africa stands as one people, they can definitely conquer the world. And that is said. We just got indications that Chief MUSI is back with us. Hopefully, his connection would permit us put through. Chief MUSI, welcome back. Now, you listen to your co-panelists. What's your point of view? Unfortunately, we're still unable to get you, but since we're gradually coming to the end of today's program, we'll just stay with you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, you mentioned that unity is of the essence on the African continent, and is very important for Africans as well as the leaders to take part, active part in uniting the African continent. You, however, reiterated that the young people should actually take part in governing systems and, of course, must elect leaders that will reflect the vision which they have for the growth of the prosperity of the African continent. Now, in a bit to crown up today's edition, when we're looking at this migrant deal and looking at the stakes involved, when you look at Africa, what lessons can the African continent draw from this deal in a bid to boost its own prosperity?
For 3 decades, young Africans have migrated out of the continent of Africa through the Sahara, through migrant routes like that, through Libya, through the streets of Gibraltar into Europe. This has taken place for the last, 3-4 decades. There's nothing strange about young Africans actually moving out, seeking for greener pastures out in the Western world. That's just what it has been. Unfortunately, within that particular span of time, those who we have elected on the African continent has also been taking vacations in the Western world, enjoying the beauties of places like the UK, Europe, America, and Asia, with that understanding that they had to be able to create those communities, those societies, in Africa. To those who they have brought in men and women with absolutely no skill sets, nothing to offer, just because they belong to the same clan, people of the same village, people who spoke the same language, to be able to occupy positions that they did not have the capacity to fulfill, those mandates to which it is that they moved into those positions to do. So we have created this satanic utopia where nothing grows, nothing gets done, the work is not done, corruption is at its peak, and this cuts across the board, across the continent of Africa, except for few exceptions on the continent. What is the way forward? I believe that we must be able to build the middle class. How do we do that? We do that by bringing people who understand that Africa needs to develop and we need to be able to build ourselves to compete in the 21st century. If we do not do that, we will be in the same place we have been for the last 4 decades. And the reality is that if you do not plan today to be able to change the status quo and reverse what is it that we have been on this trajectory, nothing will change. There is a definition for insanity which says that if you continually keep doing the same thing that you have done over and over, and believing that someday something will change, then it says you're insane. It says you're mad. Unfortunately, that has been the mode of operation on the African continent by everyone else. I'm talking about those who are operating small to medium-sized enterprises. I'm talking about those who are in positions of leadership, those who run many companies on the continent of Africa, those who own these ministries. They have operated with this particular principle in mind about taking care of themselves and not understanding that they need to be able to build a society that includes everyone. We must be able to elect to office those who espouse our ideas as Pan-Africans, period. If that was going to happen, I will be hopeful that the continent of Africa will emerge out of this dark economic age in which she's in into a more prosperous age to compete with the rest of the world, and especially now that we have entered into the era of AI. We must tell our story from an African perspective, and we must begin that by changing our minds and changing the way we look at the continent and the way we look at the rest of the world, putting Africa first, putting Africans first, not the world.
Absolutely, and this call which you made actually is very timely, as we see numerous Africans die off the coast while trying to cross or attempting to cross the Mediterranean. Now, in just a last question before we get leave of you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, could you pass across a short message to the young Africans that are always continuously embark on this risky journey of attempting to cross the Mediterranean into Europe?
Well, it's difficult to say anything because the truth of the matter is they are living a place that is hell, and they are trying to be able to gain some kind of liberty, freedom. They are trying to be able to get some kind of an economic freedom, in the Western world. The reality is this, that there's a lot of capital on the continent of Africa that is not in a monetary form. Land is the biggest capital we have on the African continent. If you can just start up a farm, if you can start up a farm. I don't care exactly what is it that you do, start up a farm. There's plenty of land on the continent of Africa that is good for farming. 60% of the world arable land is on the continent of Africa. Every family on the continent of Africa is entitled to land. For some reason, we all have land. And if we have the capacity to just start farming, just go somewhere and start farming, good things can happen. A lot of young Africans have died across that migrant route to Europe. A lot of Africans have died. A lot of Africans have been kidnapped by Arabs up north and sold into slavery. There are farms up north in Algeria, in Libya, that, especially Libya, there are farms in Libya where young African girls are held in detention camps, raped, and their children, they get pregnant, they give birth to these children, and they collect these children and they sell them, in the black market. This is what is happening on the continent of Africa in places like Libya. Please stay at home. Find ways in which you can be able to get yourself involved, at least in things about agriculture. And number two, make sure whatever you do, make sure that whoever comes into power is not some draconian, illegal thinking man who has no love for your country, who has no love for your future, who has everything made for themselves. So vote into office people who are like you, who understands the struggle, who understands what it means to rule a nation, who understands what it means to boost up the private sector so that you can be able to get the job